Islay is the southernmost island of the Inner Hebrides of Scotland. Known as the Queen of the Hebrides, it lies in Argyll just southwest of Jura and around 40 kilometres north of the Irish coast. The island's capital is Bowmore, where the distinctive round Kilarrow Parish Church and a distillery are located. Port Ellen is the main port. Islay is the fifth largest Scottish island and the seventh largest island surrounding Great Britain, with a total area of almost 620 square kilometres. There is ample evidence of the prehistoric settlement of Islay, and the first written reference may have come in the 1st century AD. The island had become part of the Gaelic kingdom of Dalriata during the early Middle Ages before being absorbed into the Norse kingdom of the Isles. The later medieval period marked a cultural high point, with the transfer of the Hebrides to the Kingdom of Scotland and the emergence of the Clan-Donald lordship of the Isles, originally centred at Finlaggan. During the 17th century the Clan-Donald star waned, but improvements to agriculture and transport led to a rising population, which peaked in the mid-19th century. This was followed by substantial forced displacements and declining resident numbers. Today, it has over 3,000 inhabitants and the main commercial activities are agriculture, malt whisky distillation and tourism. The island has a long history of religious observance, and Scottish Gaelic is spoken by about a quarter of the population. Its landscapes have been celebrated through various art forms, and there is a growing interest in renewable energy. Islay is home to many bird species such as the wintering populations of Greenland white-fronted and barnacle goose, and is a popular destination throughout the year for bird watches. The climate is mild and ameliorated by the Gulf Stream. Geography: Islay is 40 kilometres long from north to south and 24 kilometres broad. The east coast is rugged and mountainous, rising steeply from the Sound of Islay, the highest peak being Benbijia, which is a moraine at 1,612 feet. The western peninsulas are separated from the main bulk of the island by the waters of Loch Indal to the south and Loch Ruinart to the north. The fertile and windswept southwestern arm is called the Rins, and Ardnave Point is a conspicuous promontory on the northwest coast. The south coast is sheltered from the prevailing winds and, as a result, relatively wooded. The Fractal Coast has numerous bays and sea locks, including Loch Saline, Aras Bay and Clegane Bay. In the far southwest is a rocky and now largely uninhabited peninsula called the Oak, the closest point in the Hebrides to Ireland. The island's population is mainly centred around the villages of Bowmore and Port Ellen. Other smaller villages include Bridgend, Ballygrant, Port Charlotte, Port Nahaven and Port Ascaig. The rest of the island is sparsely populated and mainly agricultural. There are several small freshwater lochs in the interior, including Loch Finlaggan, Loch Ballygrant, Loch Losset and Loch Gorm, and numerous burns throughout the island, many of which bear the name River, despite the small size. The most significant of these are the River Laggan, which discharges into the sea at the north end of Laggan Bay, and the River Sawn, which, draining Loch Finlaggan, enters the head of Loch Indal at Bridgend. There are numerous small uninhabited islands around the coasts, the largest of which are Ellen Mhic, Coenich and Orsay off the Rins, Nave Island on the northwest coast, Mferoch Ellen in the Sound of Islay, and Texer off the south coast. Geology and geomorphology: the underlying geology of Islay is intricate for such a small area. The deformed Paleoproterozoic igneous rock of the Rins complex is dominated by coarse-grained gneiss cut by large intrusions of deformed Gabbro, once thought to be part of the Lewisian complex. It lies beneath the Colonsay group of metasedimentary rocks that forms the bedrock at the northern end of the Rins. It is a quartz-rich metamorphic marine sandstone that may be unique to Scotland and which is nearly 5,000 metres thick. South of Roubaix Mail there are outcrops of quartzite, and a strip of mica schist and limestone cuts across the centre of the island from the Ower to Port Ascaig. Further south is a band of metamorphic quartzite and granites, a continuation of the beds that underlie Jura. The geomorphology of these last two zones is dominated by a fold known as the Islay anticline. To the south is a shattered coastline, formed from mica schist and hornblende. The older Bowmore group sandstones in the west centre of the island are rich in feldspar and may be of Dale-Radian origin. Loch Indal was formed along a branch of the Great Glen Fault called the Loch Ruinart Fault. Its main line passes just to the north of Colonsay. This separates the limestone, igneous intrusions and Bowmore sandstones from the Colonsay group rocks of the Rins. The result is occasional minor earth tremors. There is a tillite bed near Port Ascaig that provides evidence of an ice age in the Precambrian. In comparatively recent times the island was ice-covered during the Pleistocene glaciation save for Ben Tarter M Hill on the Rins, which was an attack on the edge of the ice sheet. The complex changes of sea level due to melting ice caps and isostasy since then have left a series of raised beaches around the coast. Throughout much of late prehistory the low-lying land between the Rins and the rest of the island was flooded, creating two islands. Climate. The influence of the Gulf Stream keeps the climate mild compared to mainland Scotland. Snow is rarely seen at sea level and frosts are light and short-lived. However, wind speeds average 19 to 28 km per hour annually and winter gales sweep in off the Atlantic, gusting up to 185 km per hour. This can make travelling and living on the island during the winter difficult, while ferry and air links to the mainland can suffer delays. The driest months are April to July and the warmest are May to September, which as a result are the busiest times for tourism. Sunshine hours are typically highest around the coasts, especially to the west. Etymology. Islay was probably recorded by Ptolemy as Epidion, the use of the p suggesting of Brittonic a Pictish tribal name. In the 7th century Adomnan referred to the island as Ilia, and the name occurs in early Irish records as Isle and is Ill in Old Norse. The root is not Gaelic and of unknown origin. In 17th century maps the spelling appears as Yla or Ela, a form still used in the name of the Whiskey Culila. In poetic language Islay is known as Banrai in Sgol, or Banrai nan Ellen, usually translated as Queen of the Hebrides, and Ellen Uan Isle. The Green Isle of Islay, a native of Islay, is called An Village, pronounced. The obliteration of pre-Norse names is almost total and place names on the island are a mixture of Norse and later Gaelic and English influences. Port Ascaig is from the Norse Askvik, meaning ash tree bay, and the common suffix bus is from the Norse Bölstath, meaning farm. Gaelic names, or their anglicised versions such as Ardnave Point, from Arden Naoimh, height of the saint, are very common. Several of the villages were developed in the 18th and 19th centuries, and English is a stronger influence in the names as a result. Port Charlotte, for example, was named after Lady Charlotte Campbell, daughter of the island's then owner, Daniel Campbell of Shawfold. Prehistory. The earliest settlers on Islay were nomadic hunter-gatherers who may have first arrived during the Mesolithic period after the retreat of the Pleistocene ice caps. A flint arrowhead, which was found in a field near Bridgend in 1993 and dates from 10,800 BC, is amongst the earliest evidence of a human presence found so far in Scotland. Stone implements of the Arensbergian culture were found at Port and Islay near Port Ascaig by foraging pigs in 2015. Probably came from a summer camp used by hunters traveling round the coast in boats. Mesolithic finds have been dated to 7000 BC using radiocarbon dating of shells and debris from kitchen middens. By the Neolithic, settlements had become more permanent, allowing for the construction of several communal monuments. The most spectacular prehistoric structure on the island is Dunnose Bridge. This 375 square meters Iron Age fort occupies a prominent crag and has commanding views of the surrounding landscape. The name's origin is probably a mixture of Gaelic and Old Norse. Dun in the former language means fort, and Narsborg in the latter means fort on the crag. There is no evidence that Islay was ever subject to Roman military control, although small numbers of finds such as a coin and a brooch from the 3rd century AD suggest links of some kind with the intermittent Roman presence on the mainland. The ruins of a brocket Dun Brereig southeast of Ballygrant and the remains of numerous Atlantic roundhouses indicate the influences of northern Scotland, where these forms of building originate. There are also various crannogs on Islay, including sites in Loch Ardnave, Loch Ballygrant and Loch Gallala in the southeast, where a stone causeway leading out to two adjacent islands is visible beneath the surface of the water. There is some controversy about the nature of the relationship between the indigenous peoples of Ireland and southwest Scotland during the late Iron Age. The widely accepted theory is that the latter became populated by immigrants from the former, replacing an earlier culture, although it has also been suggested that the Gaels in this part of Scotland were indigenous to the area. History. Dalriada. By the 6th century AD, Islay, along with much of mainland Argyll, lay within the Gaelic kingdom of Dalriada with strong links to Ireland and, according to the census for en Alban, was ruled by the kin group Cene Coast.The. In 627 the son of a king of the Irish Uichalbad, a branch of the Dalnarady kingdom of Ulster, was killed on Islay at the unidentified location of Ardcoran by a warrior in an army led by King Conrad Cer of the Cork Uaqti, a kindred based in Cowal on the mainland of Scotland. The census also lists what is believed to be the oldest reference to a naval battle in the British Isles, a brief record of an engagement between rival Dalriatan groups in 719. There is evidence of another kindred on Islay, the Cene Contred, descended from a brother of the legendary Dalriatan king Fergus More, but its existence seems to have been brief, and the 430 households of the island are later said to have been divided between three great-grandsons of the eponymous founder of Cene Coast.The, the Gade, Conall and Galan. Norse influence and the Kingdom of the Isles. The arrival of Scandinavian settlers on the western seaboard of Scotland in the 9th century had a long-lasting effect. For the next 4 centuries and more, all the islands of the west fell under the control of various rulers of the Kingdom of the Isles, most of whom were of Norse origin. As is the case in the Northern Isles, the derivation of place names suggests a complete break from the past. Jennings and Krers conclude that, although there were settlements prior to the Norse arrival, there is no evidence from the onomasticon that the inhabitants of these settlements ever existed. Gaelic continued to exist as a spoken language in the Southern Hebrides throughout the Norse period, but the place name evidence suggests it it had a lowly status, possibly indicating an enslaved population. Godred Crovan was one of the Norse-Gael rulers of this Hebridean Sea Kingdom who had a connection with Islay. His origins are obscure. The chronicles of man call him the son of Harold the Black of Eastland, and state he so tamed the Scots that no one who built a ship or boat dared use more than 3 iron bolts. Godred also became king of Dublin at an unknown date, although in 1094 he was driven out of the city by Muirheart Aq Abrian, later known as High King of Ireland, according to the Annals of the Four Masters. He died of pestilence on Islay the following year. A local tradition suggests that a standing stone at Caraban near Kintra marks Godred Crovan's grave. A genuine 11th century Norse grave slab was found at Oid Mary in 1838, although it was not associated with a burial. The slab is decorated with foliage in the style of Ringreich Viking art and an Irish-style cross, the former being unique in Scandinavian Scotland. In the 12th century, a granddaughter of Godred Crovan's married the ambitious Somerled, a Norse-Gael Argyll nobleman. Godred Olafsson, a grandson of Crovan, was an increasingly unpopular king of the Isles at the time, and Somerled was spurred into action. The two fought the Battle of Epiphany in the seas off Islay in January 1156. The result was a bloody stalemate, and the island kingdom was temporarily divided, with Somerled taking control of the southern Hebrides. 2 years later, Somerled completely ousted Godred and reunited the kingdom, but the divide was re-established after the former's death in 1164. His clan Somhael descendants continued to describe themselves as King of the Sudras until the 13th century, but following the 1266 Treaty of Perth, the Hebrides were yielded to the Kingdom of Scotland. Scottish rule. Lords of the Isles. Somerled's descendants became the rulers of various powerful clans, including the MacDougals, Clandonald and the Macruaris. Alexander MacDougall's support of the opponents of King Robert the Bruce led to the forfeiture of his lands, and they were distributed between Eomer's Og MacDonald of Islay and the chief of the Macruaris, Rua Iri Mac Eilein, who also held much of Lorne, parts of Lochaber, Garmaran and the North Isles. These estates were eventually inherited by Amy Macrua Iri of Garmaran. She had married her MacDonald cousin John of Islay in the 1330s, and he now controlled significant stretches of the western seaboard of Scotland from Morven to Loch Horn and the whole of the Hebrides save for Skye. From 1336 onwards, John began to style himself Dominus Insularum, Lord of the Isles, a title that implied a connection to the earlier kings of the Isles and by extension a degree of independence from the Scottish crown, and this honorific was claimed by his heirs for several generations. Initially, the MacDonald lord's power base was on the shores of Loch Finlagan in northeastern Islay. Successive chiefs of Clandonald were proclaimed Lord of the Isles there, and their advisory Council of the Isles met on Ellen Comhale. However, as the control of the west grew in strength, the twin castles of Varus and Ardtornish in the Sound of Mull had become the heart of the lordship. By the early 15th century, the Islay Charter, a record of lands granted to an Islay resident, Brian Vic Mackay, by Domnall of Islay, Lord of the Isles in 1408, is one of the earliest records of Gaelic in public use, and is a significant historical document. In 1462, John of Islay, Earl of Ross, struck an alliance with Edward IV of England under the terms of the Treaty of Ardtornish, Westminster. The onset of the Wars of the Roses prevented Edward from fulfilling his obligations as an ally, and in 1493 MacDonald was compelled to forfeit his estates and titles to James IV. After the forfeiture, James ordered Finlagan demolished, its buildings razed, and the coronation stone destroyed to discourage any attempts at restoration of the lordship. When Martin visited Islay in the late 17th century, he recorded a description of the coronations Finlaggan had once seen. 16th and 17th centuries initially dispossessed in the wake of royal opposition to the lordship. Clan MacDonald of Duniveg's holdings in Islay were restored in 1545. In 1549, Dean Munro observed that the island was fertile, fruitful, and full of natural pastures, with good hunting and plentiful salmon and seals. He also referred to Duniveg Castle in the southeast, controlled by Clan Donald, and Loch Gorm Castle on Ellen Moor in Loch Gorm to the west, now usurped by Glen of Duard. This implied dispute with the MacLeans continued, and they were expelled from Loch Gorm by force in 1578 and defeated at the Battle of Gruinier in 1598. However, a clash with the Irish branch of the family led by Sorley Boy MacDonald and their unpopularity in Edinburgh weakened the MacDonald grip on their southern Hebridean possessions. In 1608 the Scottish Crown mounted an expedition to subdue them, and then in 1614 handed Islay over to Sir John Campbell of Cawdor in return for an undertaking to pacify the island. This the Campbells eventually achieved, although a setback occurred during the Civil War when a Covenanter army under Sir David Leslie arrived on the island in 1647. They besieged a royalist garrison at Duniveg and laid waste to the island. It was not until 1677 that the Campbells felt sufficiently at ease that to construct Islay House at Bridgend as the principal island residence. The structure was built for Sir Hugh Campbell of Cawdor and is now a Category A listed building. British era. At the beginning of the 18th century, much of the population of Argyll was to be found dispersed in small clans of farming families, and only two villages of any size, Kilarrow near Bridgend and Lagavulin, existed on Islay at the time. The agricultural economy was dependent on arable farming, including staples such as barley and oats, supplemented with stock rearing. The carrying capacity of the island was recorded at over 6,600 cows and 2,200 horses in a 1722 rental listing. In 1726 Islay was purchased by Daniel Campbell of Shawfold. It remained in his family's ownership until 1853, when it was sold to James Morrison of Berkshire, ancestor of the 3rd Baron Margodale, who still owns a substantial portion of the island. A defining aspect of 19th century Argyll was the gradual improvement of transport infrastructure. Roads were built, the Crinan Canal shortened the sea distance to Glasgow, and the numerous traditional ferry crossings were augmented by new quays. Rubble piers were built at several locations on Islay, and a new harbour was constructed at Port Ascaig. Initially, a sense of optimism in the fishing and cattle trades prevailed, and the population expanded, partly as a result of the 18th century kelp boom and the introduction of the potato as a staple. The population of the island had been estimated at 5,344 in 1755 and grew to over 15,000 by 1841. However, the sundering of the relationship between the landowners and the island's residents proved consequential. When the estate owners realized they could make more money from sheep farming than from the indigenous small farmers, wholesale clearances became commonplace. 400 people emigrated from Islay in 1863 alone, some for purely economic reasons, but many others having been forced off the land their predecessors had farmed for centuries. In 1891 the census recorded only 7,375 citizens, with many evictees making new homes in Canada, the United States and elsewhere. The population continued to decline for much of the 20th century and today is about 3,500. During World War I, two troopships foundered off Islay within a few months of each other in 1918. The American vessel SS Tuscania was torpedoed by UB-77 on 5 February with the loss of over 160 lives and now lies in deep water 6.4 kilometres west of the Mall of Oa. On 6 October HMS Otranto was involved in a collision with HMS Kashmir in heavy seas while convoying troops from New York. Otranto lost steering and drifted towards the west coast of the Rins. Answering her SOS, the destroyer HMS Mounsey attempted to come alongside and managed to rescue over 350 men. Nonetheless, the Otranto was wrecked on the shore near Makia Bay with a total loss of 431 lives. A monument was erected on the coast of the Oa by the American Red Cross to commemorate the sinking of these two ships. A military cemetery was created at Kilcoman where the dead from both nations in the latter disaster were buried. During World War II, the RAF built an airfield at Glenegadale which later became the civil airport for Islay. There was also an RAF Coastal Command flying boat base at Bowmore from 13 March 1941 using Loch Indal. In 1944 an RCAF 422 Squadron Sunderland flying boat's crew were rescued after their aircraft landed off Bowmore but broke from her moorings in a gale and sank. There was an RAF Chain Home radar station at Salago Bay and RAF Chain Home Low station at Kilkiaran.